Welcome and good morning, evening and afternoon, my dear bannermen and bannerwomen. Today, for the record, is September the 21st. We are on the 230th anniversary of the abolition of the monarchy in France. After, of course, the 757th civil rebellion in France, the French Revolution ends with their parliament, their national convention, abolishing the monarchy. Now, talking about monarchy, talking about the king and what rules on us for today is going to be the choice of what to play in Dragonflight. Now, this is not, for the record, a tier list, a ranking, you should play this or that, why do you want to play this or that. This is going to come much later on, right? This type of videos about what you should think about playing, right? If you want to play a healer, this is what the healers do. If you want to play a tank, this is what the tanks do, right? That type of video will come much later on because we are not in the state right now, in the beta, to be able to gauge things properly. As a reminder, there is no raids, there is no Mythic Plus, there are no simulations, the talents are not done whatsoever, so it's impossible to talk about these things right now. Which is exactly why I am here to counsel you, to warn you, but also to teach you and to give you a good idea of what you can expect as we get deeper into the development of the beta. Of course, as we get closer to Dragonflight, you get more and more excited and more interested on what your class or your spec can do. Right now, perhaps you can look at your own screen, your own character screen, and you see you have 5, 4, 3, maybe 7 different characters at max level. All of them are an open opportunity, an open chance to play the spec and the class in the next expansion, and you want to know more. I'm interested in playing Warlock, but I have no idea how Warlock is going to play in Dragonflight. Is it going to be strong in Dragonflight? Is it going to be worth picking or not? So there are going to be those same situations as we get closer to the release of Dragonflight. As we are now, however, as I said, it is quite difficult to choose what you could play, simply because we just don't know enough. Because even if we go back to what it was in Shadowlands, it's gonna take quite a few more weeks before we get into the situation, before we get to the point where we start being in a decent enough situation where we can start taking guesses, where we can start looking at how things are in the beta and start wondering and perhaps even predicting how things will go. If you don't remember, since I still have videos up about the Shadowlands beta, this happened more or less the last month of the beta prior to the release of Shadowlands. That was when, before the release of Shadowlands, looking at how things were in the beta, I thought that Vengeance, Demon Hunter, Holy Paladin, Resto Shaman, Marksmanship Hunter, Subtlety Rogue, Unholy Death Knight and Fire Mage were going to be the strongest specs at the release of Shadowlands. And that turned out to be true for pretty much all of those specs at the release of Shadowlands. There was the exception of Subtlety, which was gutted right before the release of the expansion, and then the exception for Unholy Death Knight, which was nerfed a couple of weeks into the expansion. Way too early to nerf Unholy that hard. But for all the other specs, it was on point by looking at what was going on in the beta. So it is certainly possible to discern, to gauge, and to predict how powerful specs are going to be in Dragonflight. If that's what you're interested in when you're thinking about what to play in Dragonflight, if the first thing you are worried about is, okay, sure, the rotation, how fun it is, how interesting it is. However, the thing that I am interested in the most is if I'm even gonna be wanted and chosen by, for example, groups, raid rosters, because I'm strong. I might like Feral Druid, I might like Shadow Priest, I might like Elemental Shaman, but I would like to know, I would like to be sure that the spec is strong at the very least before I start playing it. Otherwise, I don't want to get declined over and over in Mythic Plus groups because nobody wants me because I am shit. So that situation will of course come, but we are not there yet. We are still, I am predicting, some month to month and a half away before we reach that point. The point is where simulations are going to be out, when you can start actually understanding which talents are good. At the moment, the only thing that's happening is Feelycraft. It's just gauging based on your first impressions and nothing else. You know, if you're a fire mage, If you're a fire mage, for example, you can talk about Sun King's Blessing, and then you can talk about Fire Frenzy, and then you can talk about Fiery Rush, your 3 last capstone talents of your 3. But at the moment, you have no idea how powerful they are. You can gauge, you can guess, you can predict, you can debate how powerful they are, but there are no simulations. There is no clear and perfect play. You can maybe try on the target dummies, maybe to get an average idea, but it's not nearly enough to get a good understanding. So at the moment it's still far too early. You need to also get into Mythic Plus. If target dummies might even carry you for single target damage, maybe you need to go into Mythic Plus to start looking at how the damage looks for Mythic Plus, which is, I've been told, something that many players are interested in, competing in Mythic Plus. Making sure that their spec is powerful, is strong in Mythic Plus. That's also another thing that is very dear to many players. It's another thing that is not here yet, and you have to wait for a long time, likely, before we get a good idea of that power level of specs in Mythic Plus. And the same can be said for raiding, right? There is no raid available, there is no raid testing available, so you can't really tell how healers are going to be healing in the new raid environment. For example, how DPS and their burst windows are gonna work. You have no idea, because the raid isn't here. So the point, quite confusing, of the video is more like, if you were interested, if you wanted to know which specs you want to play in Dragonflight, which specs interest you, which spec is OP, which spec is strong, right now there is no answer. So beware of people telling you or informing you on, for example, a tier list of specs or a ranking of classes or DPS specs and healers and whatnot, because it's just not possible right now, and it won't be possible for quite a few weeks before we get all of the tools available to start guessing and gauging how powerful the specs are. Yes, once we get all of those things in our hands, it will be possible. You will be able to start looking out for the first, grades, the first ratings of specs once we have everything available to us, all the testing for the raid, for Mythic Plus, the simulations, the final form of the talents that are going to be coming out. Then it will be possible. It will be at the very least an option for players to start gauging who is powerful or not. But right now, it's impossible. So you shouldn't even sweat it, starting to think about what to play in Dragonflight right now, because it's just way too early. And the same goes for me. I am thinking about playing Dragonflight as a healer. It would be, I actually found out, very surprisingly, that this would be, since Vanilla, the first expansion where I would play back-to-back a healer as a main, because I had DPS main in Vanilla, and then DPS main in TBC, healer main in Wrath, DPS main in Cataclysm, healer main in Mists, DPS main in Legion, DPS main in BFA, and then now healer main in Shadowlands, and if I do that, healer main in Dragonflight as well. But even then, I still have no idea. I am for the moment defaulting to Shaman, because I play Shaman, and I chose to play Shaman because it was the most fun healer for me in Shadowlands. That was the decision. So for now, it's Shaman, but I have no idea how our specs and classes will play out in Dragonflight right now. For example, I despise the way Resto Druid plays. All this brainless spam of rejuvenation, very unfun. Maybe it changes in Dragonflight, maybe it's much more entertaining. I also don't like the way Holy Paladin works in the melee version of Holy Paladin. Maybe with Blizzard trying very hard to make the caster version of Paladin work, maybe that's gonna be much more enjoyable, and I might be switching to Holy Paladin, but I don't know for the moment. So even though the hype, the excitement and the info about Dragonflight is going to continue to come out, with more and more stuff coming out, the balancing of the talents, the buffs and the nerfs, the changing around of the talents on multiple specs, that there is still going to be quite a bit of time before you can actually know if this is good or this is bad. Like, what does this mean? You know, even though we cover them, even though we cover all the changes because it's interesting to talk about it, right? I enjoy doing that, but even then, once we see a talent saying, oh, this talent now gives you 10% less damage, but has 1 less rank. Oh, this talent no longer gives you 5% haste, it gives you 5% crit. You know, it's like, okay, it's interesting and fun to talk about it, but in the end, we know absolutely nothing about, is this powerful? Is this better? Is this worse? Is this improving the spec or worsening the spec? As long as we don't have the tools for ourselves, Blizzard does, but we don't. So as long as we don't have the tools to gauge how more powerful or how less powerful these changes are, a lot of the talk around the specs and classes is mostly just fan fiction. It's mostly just feely crafting. It's mostly just talk for the sake of talking about it. Because you're interested, you want to be part of the discussion, even though it's not going to amount to much until we know more about the specs and their power, which I'm assuming if we follow the leaks and the expansion comes out late November, at worst early December, this time, the time where gauging the power of the specs, who is going to be flavor of the month in the first season of Dragonflight, who is going to be OP, who should you roll to, who should you play if you want to be a meta spec, that type of discussion will start no earlier than November. Early November. Or at the very earliest, very late October. That's when you can start having that type of discussion for the specs and classes. So, that was the point of the video, basically a TLDR of the state of the development for the classes and specs in Dragonflight and what you can expect and how and when you can expect to start seriously thinking about what to play in Dragonflight, making your informed decisions on which specs to play when we have actually information, we have actually data, numbers, proof that certain specs are good or not. For now, as I said, it's mostly just for fun. It's mostly just to follow something you enjoy, right? Without really too much in-depth talk about it because it's just too early. So this was the TLDR on this Reset Wednesday as we are going through the new beta build where for sure more news are gonna come out. Very likely as this video has come out, there are going to be news out for this new build of the beta, which we will cover, of course, likely tomorrow. So, for now, I am going to leave you to the rest of your midweek day, your Wednesday. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of my patrons for supporting me and being a big help in allowing me to continue to produce content for WoW. You can do more by supporting me in liking and commenting down below on this very video, as well as, of course, subscribing to the channel itself. Finishing off the help and support with some social interactions by following me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right down at these, as usual, I think it's here, 2 links. Thanks, of course, guys, for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, as I said, I am waiting to know a little bit more about the power of the specs before I choose my main. I can already tell you with a spoiler that I'm not gonna be playing Mr. Monk. I'm sorry. I have no hope. I have no hope for Monk.